All right. Hello, everyone. All three of you, four of you on YouTube. It's fine. Small audience is fine. This doesn't have the pull of other books, even though it fucking should, because it's just the best goddamn reading of Nietzsche there is. Of course, we're reading Pierre Klossowski's Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle. We are getting most of the way through chapter 6. Decently way through the book, actually, which is great. About halfway. Where do I even start right now? There's so much that's been going on that we've been driving through. Okay. We're within the larger section as we move through chapter 6, which is about selection, about how the eternal return shifted within Nietzsche's thought, very blah, 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 all that fun shit, sort of as a thing, right? We've been talking about the imposter philosopher and how the imposter philosopher operates versus, say, science, and how experimentation functions inside of all of this. What we started talking about using Nietzsche, and it's going to be really important because here we're going to be getting really deep into some Nietzsche at length, I think would be the way to put this. There's a lot of Nietzsche that we're going to be reading and going through. And then we're going to have Klossowski, of course, analyze after we do, so you can see how bad I am at my job. We've been talking about how the herd operates, and the idea of intelligence or intellect being an organ of the herd that functions around what we now call, and what he's referring to, not Nietzsche, but what Klossowski is referring to as the reality principle. Which is this baseline reality that we all share, blah, 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 understand the world, that there is a reality that we all are able to talk about. This conformity, this consistency of understanding of the background of all of this stuff. He's been talking about the efficiency of this simulacrum, and that science, which seems to us like something that demystifies the mystical, actually is about reinforcing the thing it claims to dissolve, that it's always bending towards that same intellect. As we move forward into the next little bit here, we're going to be talking through a whole bunch of different things. It's going to be a whole bunch of different things. But two specific things to sort of keep tabs on as a thing. One sec. Let me just make sure I've got, where did chat go? There you are. Hello, YouTube. Hello, back to you, Pash. Hello, back to you, Pashy. We want to talk about specifically the fabulation thesis. You're going to be understanding a lot more of that. But specifically that it's chaos even here that is going to turn out to be a fiction. Chaos is a fiction of our understanding of what we call chaos. It's going to make a lot more sense through Nietzsche and the way Klossowski is going to come to explain it, but even chaos, it's not just that we have this layer of narrative we've placed on top of things that is the fiction, is the intellect, is the reality principle as we talk about things. Oh yeah, no, we all have the shared spherical world. We all have this. We have this understanding, blah, blah. But also the chaos is itself a thing we've named and created a fiction around. Okay? The second thing is talking about complex, we'll say touching into some of the more complicated wording around things. The idea of breeding and experimentation. Enjoy the language there. It's going to be a journey, and there's a reason for it as we get going, okay? Luckily, each of these different bits is pretty simple and pretty small, and so we'll be able to burn through each of the sections and get to explanations pretty quickly. Let me make sure my highlighter's working. Where did it go? There you are. Come on. There you go. All right. Highlighter is a thing. I'm going to move chat here. YouTube chat. I can't move. I wish I could pop Discord chat out so much because it's too big to have like in the corner of things, which sucks really hard. Really sucks. But that's fine. So be it. Off we go. When Nietzsche says that all we have of being is a certitude, that is to say that being is something that represents itself, that posits itself before itself. This kind of fabulation attributed to being is taken up in the term chaos. As long as its definition as a rival force does not intervene, chaos is a state prior to this self-fabulation. The will to power as a formulation is a fabulating formulation, not in the sense of subjectivism, but of a behavior that surpasses the human. Fabulation, and it's a great word. It's a great sounding word. Deleuze really uses it. People use it around Deleuze and a lot of the thinkers around him. It's easier if I were to say in English, fabulation, because that's what you're doing, is you're creating fables. It's the creation of stories. It is the act by which something is building itself or being built into a tale, a fable, fabulation, fabulation. It's the same root, ultimately just sounds cooler when you say fabulation, I think. I think it sounds better as a thing. And so that tends to be, just, again, good words. I like the words. I think they're excellent. So let's tear through it. When Nietzsche says, please, it's very good. All we have of being is certitude. That is to say that being is something that represents itself, that posits itself before itself. This kind of fabulation attributed to being is taken up in the term chaos. All we have of being is certitude. When Nietzsche says this, we never really touch being. This is sort of talking against Heidegger and a few other things, but being, the existence of a thing, of ourselves, of any of it, we never really touch it. What we have is a feeling of certitude, a feeling of certainty that something is there. Narrativation, it's not the same as narrativization. Fabulation is very specifically like the actual sort of construction of something itself. When we talk about the fabulation of life, it isn't the narrativization. We're not laying a narrative on top of it. It is the way that life generates the fable itself. So it's a more self-driven or thing-driven thing. Yeah. And so being itself is being and fabulation here is kind of what is probably the best example of this. All of being certitude, that is to say that being is something that represents itself, that posits itself before itself. The language in French, I think, will help, and sitting with the words here might help too. Representer represents itself. This is the theatrical masking as well. This is the representing itself, like on stage. It is staging something again, representing the movie of the week, representing the hot play of Broadway, whatever it is. That's the thing that is sort of being said. That being is something that represents itself, that posits itself before itself. And posits itself, the language here is the German idealism, the Heideggerian, the Hegelian, the German idealist sort of vocabulary. Fichte wrote about the positing of the self before itself. But this is running in reverse. Fichte and Fichte. I don't care. That guy, the guy that everyone thinks is Hegel. The way that like Fichte talked about the ego sort of put itself out there. The ego makes itself. The ego thinks and considers itself. And by doing, like, I think, therefore I am, run sort of to almost absurdity, the idea of the ego grounding itself. It grounds knowledge by doing this. This is not it. The being here, as Klossowski is talking about it through Nietzsche, posits itself and thereby fabulates. It produces a fiction that has no ground. So it's a celebration of existence, not self-actualization. It's neither. Not even a celebration of existence. You say it like Fichte. Well, I can do Fichte. That's a great name. Fichte is a great name. It's better than when you guys were lying to me about how to spell Goth, which I refuse to believe, everyone. You liars. Okay. The move being made here, and it's going to be important. There's so much. I could just keep going. Mr. Gogi says, no, it's Fichte. You motherfuckers. You fucking assholes. I hate you people. All of you are fucking with me. It's pronounced Goatsy. Exactly. Nietzsche says that all we have of being is a certitude. This is almost a epistemological point. We don't have access to the things in themselves. We couldn't possibly. That we have a fabulation attributed to being taken up in the term chaos. This is moving the comment being made by Nietzsche that is epistemological and moving it into this ontology of things, that there is no in itself fundamentally, that there is only this self-staging, the self-re-representation, the representation. There's going to be some really specific stuff when we get into this, but that's kind of what I would say. I think that's just the way to understand this for now. And he continues, as long as its definition as a rival force does not intervene, chaos is a state prior to this self-fabulation. So we're talking about kind of two different chaos moments, or two ways chaos is applied. Val says, oh, like it assumes itself and makes itself. It makes the fabulation is the creation of the fable in its existence. There's a great title for a book, To Lose the Fabulation of Philosophy, that is that same thing. It's understanding how the fabulation of everything happens. It's a really great way to sort of think through how to read Deleuze. Klossowski is doing much the same thing here with Nietzsche. And we're making that same sort of play. It'll make more sense as we get going about how the narrative is built, but fabulation, just start getting used to the term, I think, is the way to go. So, someone else on YouTube is saying that Fichte or Fichte. So I thought Fichte, you know what? Everyone is now going to say it's Fichte, Fichte, or Finkter, or Ficht. I hate you all. How about everyone knows who I'm talking about, so it doesn't matter. If I say the guy who everyone thinks is Hegel, I don't even have to say his name. All right, in blue here, the second line. As long as its definition as a rival force does not intervene, chaos is a state prior to this self-fabulation. There's some really interesting language here. If we're talking about chaos as something defined as a rival force, and that's not intervening, which is like the chaos of things that intervenes on things, right? The opponent of stability, the chaos of the world. Oh, things are going to fall into chaos. This is something pushing against form and order. Now, if we do that, if we just get rid of that, Just not intervene on that way. Talk instead about chaos as a state prior to this. It is this thing before anything is able to stage itself. It is the space of pure intensities, where there is no representation, where you might say desire and the machinic unconscious exist because there's no unity and no story and only pure multiplicity. This is sort of exactly just doing the same thing as Deleuze, by the way. But the moment you call it a rival, you've given it a role in your fabulation, in your drama, right? You've given it much more than maybe it deserves as a thing, I would say. But you've given it, you've fabulated it in the moment you've invoked it in that way, right? So if I say, oh, it's all chaos, well, now we've got chaos as a character. He's a dude that does things. He's really useful in the video game Hades, for example. Hades 2 especially. The thing is saying who he is, what he is. We've given that. We've given antagonist a class and a thing. We've dressed him, we've masked him, we've put him on stage and said, hey, here, go, chaos, do your thing. And this is that's great. And let's do the last little bit. The will to power as a formulation is a fabulating formulation, not in the sense of a subjectivism, but of a behavior that surpasses the human. This is basically saying Heidegger's a piece of shit. Heidegger's wrong. Not a piece of shit. I should be careful when I say that. But it's pretty much anti-Heidegger in its language. If you haven't read Heidegger, lucky you. Lucky you. Heidegger wrote a lot about Nietzsche. It's worth noting that Nietzsche's the book Heidegger wrote on Nietzsche was translated by Klossowski into French. So he's very familiar with Heideggerian takes on Nietzsche, I would say. It's a pretty easy sort of background. The guy's got that thing. Is that subjectivism? Ayn Rand didn't exist yet to the world, luckily. So no, this is a subjectivism in the sense of, this position is able to look at things. Will to power is a formulation, fabulating form, not in the sense of a subjectivism. It isn't creating a subjectivity or a position from which things are observed. That's what he's saying. It's not in that sense. Instead, it's very particularly the behavior that surpasses the human, not creating the human's position. That's the line. And it's a very particular way of looking at the will to power. I'm going to have to talk about Heidegger. One of the ways that people who read Nietzsche can read the will to power is that the will to power is the will of a willing subject. Okay? Like Heidegger does, like so many fucking people do, that the will to power is singular. Your will to power is the things you want, go get them. Like a high school white kid who's reading Will to Power and he's like, oh yeah, fucking I like this. It's so that's why it's close to Ayn Rand. Very close, because it's the same mental space. But there is no willing subject here, right? Because that's Heidegger's thesis, more or less. I'm stating Heidegger's thesis. That's how he talks about it as a thing. And again, this dude Klossowski not only knows that, but this dude Klossowski's translated it. He translated it. Two of the volumes, I think. And it's a Klossowski style thing. And he's like, no. Fabulating is not done by a subject. The will to power doesn't create stories because those are the stories a person wants. The will to power doesn't exist in that way at all. It's a behavior that goes past the human, that's beyond the human. That's a behavior that surpasses us. It forces staging. It's not someone behind the staging. There's not good and bad fabulation. This is where it's not that we're talking about like good fabulation or bad fabulation. This is specifically Klossowski saying this is how fabulation happens. It's a full disagreement with Heidegger. He's like, no. He's like saying no. No. Does that make sense, Anton? Yeah. That is the worst pun I've ever heard in my life, and I absolutely adore it. Heidegger's the Easter Bunny. He hides all the eggs. That's terrible. That's fucking terrible. That's just fucking awful. But I'm a dad, so it lands with me. That's only so much I can do. That's fucking terrible. That's a short version. That's a paragraph 1. We got a little bit more to do right here. It's a big longer paragraph, and then we've got a big Nietzsche analysis coming. So this is like prefiguring the Nietzsche shit that's about to land. All right. Chaos, it might be objected, is already a phantasm in Nietzsche, a term that simulates the most distance of domains and therefore the supreme authority, which every phantasm born in the closest region, the most immediate domain, i.e., that of the individual in relation to itself and others, would appeal to. For science, chaos does not exist anymore. Nietzsche will say, then the species or the individual exist. Laws exist only because of our need to calculate. Only quantities of force exist. Chaos, then, is already nothing more than the term of a negative formulation that we establish on the basis of our own conditions of living. Chaos does not exist as an intention, and we cannot conceive of ourselves other than as intentional beings. Where does this impossibility come from? From the fact that the forces we improperly name chaos have no intention whatsoever. Nietzsche's unavowable project is to act without intention, the impossible morality. Now, the total economy of this intentionless universe creates intentional beings. The species man is a creation of this kind, pure chance, in which the intensity of forces is inverted into intention. This is the work of morality. The function of the simulacrum is to lead human intention back to the intensity of forces, which generate phantasms. This is not the function of science, which, denying intention, compensates for it in a beneficial and efficacious activity. If you're ever in the anti-Oedipus readings and you hear me start, or any of my streams, you start hearing me talk about permanent revolution. That's what we're getting into. Let's go bit by bit. Chaos, it might be objected, is already a phantasm in Nietzsche, a term that simulates the most distant of domains and therefore the supreme authority, which every phantasm born in the closest region, the most immediate domain, i.e., that of the individual in its relation to self and others, would appeal to. Is going to be the continuation. We're going to take this opening on its own. Chaos, it might be objected, is already a phantasm in Nietzsche, a term that simulates distant domain, blah, 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 blah. And I can only do one page at a time because I'm not doing 2 pages right now. This is Klossowski structuring an opening objection to the idea we were just talking about, the Heideggerian take on all of this, the subjectivism, the fabulation of the will to power being subjects thing, that I will, I choose, I'm wanting, my will. Then it's the Nazi version, the fascist version, the totalized human that does the thing. It's the Nazi version. It's a Nazi. A Nazi is the guy who wrote it. I can say that because it's literal. He called himself a Nazi, joined the Nazi party. So that's the thing. Instead, Klossowski is saying no. Nietzsche here has a phantasm of chaos. It's this close range phantasm, right? Nietzsche's got these migraines. He's got these bodily issues and mental space things, these things that are very evocative from his body, his direct relation to himself and others. He has this thing going on. To give that phantasm authority, he's projecting a double of it. To give this authority to this existence, he's projecting out chaos. And he's appealing to the cosmic version as the guarantor of the intimate version. The universe is chaotic. Therefore, my internal chaos is not madness, but truth. This is the entire book's been doing this. Do you understand that he's been talking about Nietzsche in this sense? We've been not psychoanalyzing. That's not the jam here, because we're not doing anything that's like, oh, here's what he really means. It's taking on its surface what Nietzsche's going through, what he's doing, what he's writing, and just fucking reading it. He is simulating the most distant of domains, and therefore the supreme authority which every phantasm born in the closest region, the most immediate domain, his bodily domain, the experience of his everyday life, would appeal to. The individual in relation to itself and others would appeal to. He is investing in the structure that he is experiencing personally. He's investing in the cosmic structure. Yes, I think that's how I'd word it. We could say, at this point, to just sort of talk through how the wording is used, that chaos is the simulacrum of cosmology. The language that he's using here and going to be using is playing in this space. It's prefiguring the objection. Because as we've been reading and as we've been going forward and talking about all this, chaos is incredibly important to Klossowski. The space of no intention, right? That, like, fundamentally. But chaos is a phantasm. And if it's just a phantasm, then all of this architecture, this intensity beneath meaning, the forces beneath the person, ends up being no deeper than the valetudinary states that Nietzsche experiences as a person, right? He's projecting these things into the sky and God and the cosmos and the way of everything. If we're going to read this pathologizing version of Nietzsche, instead of just purely this, oh, it's a philosophical thing, then it's talking about method and diagnosis at once. He's building an objection into his own work here. It's awesome. We're going to get into why, but it's a really fantastic. This is so good. This gets so good very quickly here. From YouTube, Ricivates. Hello, Sir Brooks. No, that's very kind of you. I had an out-of-context question. Mostly everyone does. I'm an undergrad history student. I wish to learn more about philosophy of history. I'd have to think about that. We have some people in the server who that's their entire thing. Join the QC and ask in the theory. There's a theory forum where, like, you can go, hey, I need philosophy of history. I'd have to think through who would be interesting to me. Then I'm not just going to give you the same normal, here's blah, blah, blah. Like, there's obviously people I'd recommend, but there are people who very much specialize in that I know I have some of their books. I'd have to think through it, though. I'd have to think through it. But I would join the QC. Otherwise, Sorry, everyone. I'm trying to answer this very quickly. Give me a minute. Most of the stuff that I deal with when it comes to philosophy of history is not going to be direct, hardline analytical shit, but instead analysis that is, it's a philosophy of history or a philosophy of understanding history, the same way that I would argue Deleuze is a significant philosophy of, but everyone hold on for 2 seconds. Sorry. Phone call. Sorry, that was my mother calling because she saw my stream last night, I guess, just now. and she was like, Violet, because I had to leave my stream last night because Violet was hurt. Violet's fine, by the way. She's in a very adorable, pretty little sling because she fucked her elbow up because she runs like a, I don't know. She's not very coordinated. Not yet. She's not very coordinated. So she's fine. As I was saying, philosophy of history stuff, and then we'll get back to this. The way to, for me, get at it the best is to read people like Braudel, who literally does a recount. It's a historian, but the way they go about it is clear and crisp in everything they do. You can get the idea of how they do it extremely well. With that, I would say Godelier is like more anthropological history. But those two, I would say, they'd be the first ones I'd probably consider. There are some very, very good people doing it directly. It's not my jam. So wish I could help more. I would ask in the QC. Really good help would it be waiting for you there. It would be really good there. Apologies. I can't help more. All right, let's continue. For science, chaos does not exist anymore, Nietzsche will say, than the species or the individual exists. Laws exist only because of our need to calculate. Only quantities of force exist. You don't have to call me Sir Brooks. I'm just Brooks. You're very, very either overstatingly kind and hilarious, which I adore, or you're being just intentionally funny, which also works because it does set me off. You did well. This is a very compact set of sentences. I put them together because it's all denials. Like, these are hardline denials as a thing, right? Science doesn't recognize chaos. It recognizes no species. It recognizes no individual and also no laws. It's a lot at once. It's a lot to hit through and sort of talk through. But the point is the fixity of the human being, of you and your species and individuality and your chaos and the laws that govern you. All of these things is something that science is sort of secretly protecting. Right? But because chaos doesn't exist, no more than the species, the individual. Laws only exist for this useful calculation reason. This is if science has abolished these things, then a practical defense of the species is not really a scientific commitment. It is instead more a moral one that is riding on morality within science. Yes. Although I'm sort of now treating morality like a horse. It's fair, though. It's a fair statement. Fair statement. Yeah. And we can actually just keep going. Chaos, then, is already nothing more than the term of a negative formulation that we establish on the basis of our own conditions of the living. Conditions of living. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Is that coming through? A little bit. A little bit. Negative formulation is the key term in this sentence. Well, it'll pass. It's our landlord has guys come by and clean and do the yard and all that stuff. Only so much I can do about it. Negative formulation. Chaos itself doesn't have an affirmative positive chaos to it. It isn't a thing affirmatively. We can't talk about chaos in terms of what it is because it's about the disorderliness of something orderly. Chaos doesn't have an affirming formulation. It says only not ordered, not intended, not lawful. That's what chaos is, an opposition to something else. It's a negation of something else. It's measured against things we possess, right? Must be us as a thing. We have ordered realities. We have a lawful reality. Oh, look, that's just too chaotic. We are not a chaotic people. And it's like, because we have a possession of these things, we claim it. So chaos becomes the negative of our own categorizations, developed from ourselves and our herd mentality. Right? So chaos, which is incredibly important to all these guys and all of these guys, is now sort of saying that it's only the negative image of that which it is supposed to precede. But if it precedes the thing that it only exists in opposition to, suddenly we have a problem. We have a problem if chaos is like a thing that we're going to talk about, because it can't precede that which generates it, or which it is only existing in opposition to. Okay? Does that make sense? It's a big contradiction. Big old fucking contradiction. This is why I love Klossowski, because he embraces the shit out of contradictions. Like, super. It's great. It's great. Chaos, then, is already nothing more than the term of a negative formulation that we establish on the basis of our own conditions of living. Chaos does not exist as an intention, and we cannot conceive of ourselves other than as intentional beings. I reread the first, reading the second, because it's an important particular thing. This is a structural impasse of the book at large. Like, this is, when you exist with intention, which you do, as much as you may not want to say so, or you may not understand it, you have an intention in every moment, everything. It's the aim at something, the purpose to X. Everything you do has some semblance of purpose. And intention is sort of baked into existence at this point. You do things to do other things. This is how we're taught. This is the steps of the world, the path to happiness, whatever you want to call it. This is extremely modern capitalist, but this is a thing. It's a feature of human thought. But Klossowski's saying, oh, maybe it's not. Maybe it's not actually a feature of human thought, among other things. Maybe it is the form itself of human thought. If you are thinking about things at all, if you're considering the world or any of these things, you're thinking purposefully. There's purpose built into what you're thinking and considering. We cannot conceive of ourselves other than as intentional beings. Nietzsche, this is one of the four great errors for Nietzsche. It's one of the things. We're formed at once a piece of fate, belonging to a whole. There is nothing that can judge or measure the whole, because that would mean measuring, judging, and comparing the whole, which we can't do because there's nothing outside of the whole. So we're within the system, so we can't, like, this is the four great errors. We only can conceive of ourselves as intentional beings. As a thing. We can't. Oh, that's it. That's the end of that. Chaos is not an intention. We cannot conceive of ourselves other than intentional beings. So it's only the negative image, because we can only consider intention. This is the way thought works, is fabulation. Because it fabulates and creates stories with intention in it, you can't consider chaos on its own. It can only be a negative image, because the way thought works, the image of thought itself, functions in this way. Okay? Now, why is this impossible, he asks. Why is this impossible? Where does this impossibility come from? From the fact that the forces we improperly name chaos have no intention whatsoever. Nietzsche's unavowable... Actually, I'm going to redo this. Where does this impossibility come from? It comes from the fact that the forces we improperly name chaos have no intention whatsoever. Nietzsche's unavowable project is to act without intention, the impossible morality. Okay, let's take bit by bit here. The impossibility of chaos being an affirming thing is because we only have the ability to conceive of ourselves within conception, the conception of thought. We have to think about ourselves, but in order to think, we have to, fabulation's part of it. So to consider ourselves means putting ourselves in the world with some level of intention, no matter how fucking minor. Which means that to do so, chaos can only be a negative of that. So that impossibility comes from the fact that we have fucked up what chaos is. The forces that we call chaos have no intention at all. They're not negative intention, which is how we tend to think of chaos. They're as if we don't even exist in a different dimension. They don't even understand that we exist in any capacity. Not in that sense. The attempt to not fabulate is to attempt an immaculate conception. I know that line from somewhere, but that is a very good line. And if you came up with it yourself, it's a very good line. It's a very good line. God damn it. Kev, Arachne, you need to write that down. That needs to go on like a nice background, like the wooded thing with like a quote, just Arachne. So I can look for it on Google and I can then claim it for myself. I separated in blue because I think it's worth slowing down on this one, because this is like this is such a fucking incredibly complicated, simple sentence. Nietzsche's unavowable project is to act without intention, the impossible morality. Unavowable project. Start with that. Avow and disavow are basically acknowledgement or outright refusing, the opposite of that, right? Unavowable is not saying the undeclared, right? Or the unspoken. It is the unspeakable, the undeclarable. Unavowable project is a thing that cannot be spoken of, admitted to, avowed, considered, contemplated directly without destroying it. Because if Nietzsche avowed this project, he'd be giving it intention. So it's a big deal. The unavowable is a huge one. Klossowski is not the only person to love the idea of the unavowable, especially around Nietzsche. Bataille does the exact same thing. Blanchot does the same thing. This is huge. It's a community, a thing that cannot speak of itself, that which is unavowable. Phenomenal term. Super love it. But here it's really, really, really important. The second part, which is the to act without intention. Come on. To act without intention. It's a paradoxical statement. If all action is intentional in form, acting without intention is almost formally void of meaning. Right? More or less. Anton says, like having a global organization of flat earthers. No, that's cute. This is much more literally speaking of it destroys it. Literally speaking of it destroys it. So let's say it's and not that you choose not to. It is a thing that can't be spoken of. Even when you do nothing, that is intention. If you're intending to do nothing, yes. Like that's the point, is acting or not acting with any intention. Nietzsche's unavowable project is to act without intention. It is an impossible morality. That's the other bit. The impossible morality. This is not a super duper difficult morality. Like this is like, I know you're making a joke, Anton. I'm just being very, sometimes I have to respond to jokes just in case someone goes, oh, that's serious, because you never know what people will take seriously. I have low standards for people. The content of this morality is impossible. That's that. Now, the total economy of this intentionalist universe creates intentional beings. I almost want to just sit on this for like an hour. Because all of this is so much. If Nietzsche's project that Klossowski's unearthing here is formally impossible, right? Then, like, the reevaluation material we're about to go through, the way we evaluate the systems of this, we're going to be talking through, and it's a huge deal. This is going to be, it's so interesting. Fuck you, Pashy. Sir Brooks, I hate you so much. Is chaos like darkness, where existence depends on the absence of light? The concept chaos is basically like that, yes. First, there has to be light for there to be darkness. Prior to that, it's not darkness, it's just what things are. The moment you have light, yes. So it becomes it's only in opposition, it's only a lack of. The way that people talk about cold versus heat, it's a lack of heat, even though that's not really what it is. We can only speak of it in terms of this other thing. Chaos is fundamentally that, because again, we're speaking with intention. We're speaking about the intention and fabulation of things across the board. That's the idea. And so he goes on, the total economy of this intentionalist universe creates intentional beings. The species man is a creation of this kind, pure chance, in which the intensity of forces is inverted into intention, the work of morality. I love this interpretation of all of Nietzsche. Sorry if I missed it. How is this different than ideas like living in harmony with the Tao and whatnot? Because that's an intentional. And even the Tao masters would actually say that it's not about living in harmony with the Tao. They would say, you already are, you just don't know it, which is one of my favorite lines, because this is the nightmare of all of that, right? I want to be enlightened. Well, that's not a good start. That's not a good start, because guess what? That's not how we talk about that, and that's not the thing. It being enlightened would mean you don't care about it in any capacity. It loses all meaning. Well, Now you have the intention builds and creates the trouble itself. It's I tend to go back to the Lao Tzu line, and I think it's best said by anyone who really follows. It's in all the sutras as well. You are already enlightened. Your problem is you don't know it yet. It's such a simple way of stating it. And it's the same thing. It's the ability for us, you are already doing this. You're already made of this. You just don't know it. And so you're laying all these other things you don't know on top. It's good stuff. And yes, like chat's saying in YouTube, you need to live in harmony with the Tao. It went down by 1,100 points yesterday. We must live in better harmony with the Tao. This is a encapsulation of there's so much said in this. We somehow exist. We are people. I can speak of us as human species that is doing things and has intention, right? Which is weird because the total economy of this universe of the intentionless has created intentional beings. We are an offshoot of this intentionless mass, right? Deleuze talks about this. Guattari talks about this in Desiring Production. One of the great challenges of this. It's very strange that the space of desiring production, which has no intention, has no representation, has no grasp of any larger goal, has created beings that are clearly intentional, that are directional in some capacity. In some capacity, right? That's the thing. Man is an accident. It's a by chance creation of this whole thing that is based in this chance in which the intensity of forces has inverted into intention. And the work of morality is at play here. Morality is this translation of drive, of the will to power, of the machines of desire into purpose. Into purpose. It is the conversion process itself. That's what morality is. It's the conversion process itself. And inverted is such a fucking good word for this. The bodily impulses become a specter of the voluntary ego. We talked about this early on, the way that Nietzsche was writing about it and Klossowski's reading it. Inversion also, by the way, implies reversibility. Means we can actually undo that. How? Well, I wonder if there's a power in something we've been talking about, like, say, the function of the simulacrum is to lead human intention back to the intensity of forces, which generate phantasms. This is not the function of science, which, denying intention, compensates for it in a beneficial and efficacious activity. This is what the simulacrum does. Simulacrum. And again, not Baudrillard's. Baudrillard hates the simulacrum and he decries it, which I'm not really a big fan of. Boo-hoo crying about all of this shit. Klossowski instead, this is an affirmative thing, the simulacrum. Deleuze runs with this as well, significantly. It is the reverse of the inversion we've been talking about. Morality takes intensity and converts it to a directed, intentional purpose. Simulacrum takes that intention and that purpose and bends it back towards intensity. It is a counter inversion, a counter actualization device. Deleuze affirms the simulacrum. Correct. The twilight of the idol. It's Deleuze in Logic of Sense does a phenomenal job reading Klossowski's La Ressemblance and his version of the simulacrum very much in that space. Simulacrum you can talk about as deception or vehicle. And that thing we talked about in the last two readings, simulacra aren't really lies, not primarily lies, told to the herd at large. Simulacrum are more machines for running the operation that the herd, the fabulation that the herd operates backwards. The simulacrum is counter-moral techna. Cool? Are you following? Hope you're following. Now we do a lot of Nietzsche. A lot of Nietzsche. Not a lot of Nietzsche. It's a decent amount. This is quotes directly from Nietzsche's time during his experience at Simulacra. There's a lot to be done there. There's a lot to be done there and played with. But these fragments are very particular. You'll understand why. So before we move on, let me do some of the questions. Ragni says, simulacra can only be similar to each other by being different, both to themselves as well as others. Yes, correct. I'm not sure I get how simulacrum does that. Well, luckily, there's a book that we're reading. And there's a book we're reading that's going to go over it. I promise. We've been building to this point. The rest of the book is going to be doing a lot with it. We'll get there. And also, like, literally, we're going to be getting there today, actually. So just stick around for a bit. Val asks, does morality literally make unintentional intensities into intentional subjects, like organizing them? Or does it retroactively code them as being intentional the whole time? That's a fucking great phrasing. I would modify it lightly. Let me re-say it back. What morality does is it creates a superstructure and structure where desire, the intensities, are able to be invested as the infrastructure itself. Right? So that infrastructure, the way that the apparatus of things, the infrastructure of the social groups, the infrastructure of how we interact, all of those things, how they work is organization and all of that. It isn't so much retroactively coding. It's not so much retroactively coding as creating only the space where the code of it is allowed or possible or avowable. And so it creates a sort of process. Again, Klossowski doesn't read it as retroactive fully because we can't go back and reaccess directly. And we can reaccess by going forward and doing this process we're going to be talking about. But I think more I would say is that it's morality is a structure that allows that thing to be directly invested. Does that make sense as I say it? Because it's the moment it's made, that intentional space, that the morality, because morality is about is-oughts, way things are, how we consider stuff, all of that. That structure of what we are, how we consider ourselves, how we slice off meaning, how we place things in certain orders, it kind of comes all at once. It's Ice 9 I used as an example because I love Vonnegut, but it doesn't require that you literally like, oh, we start here and then why is it everything else? Because I started with this idea. Why is everything? It's more like Ice 9 functions where you drop it into the water and everything gets turned into crystal and it just goes. And it's the thing structurates itself around that first crystal. You should read everything Vonnegut ever wrote, basically. You should read everything Vonnegut ever wrote. But for sure, you know what? All of it. I'm just going to say all of it. Because it's just very good. I'm going to read the whole fragment. We're going to come back around because it's only this like smaller paragraph. I don't want to stop too much because Klossowski's about to tear into this and it's going to be a whole thing. So stick with it, I think would be the phrasing I'd use. Trying to, at least. We'll see. Okay. I have not attended these sessions, so I'm not sure what simulacra means here or phantasms. Okay. It's one of those things I'm happy to do, and it's worth going over. For Klossowski, the way that meaning and speech comes to be, like you asking the question there, or how you understand your world or anything, it doesn't start with just the understanding part. It's not purely the logical part of the brain. It's through Nietzsche and through a few other things, he sort of works backwards. We start with, and I'm going to do my best not to use Deleuze's language. They very much intermingle in my head because they're, like Deleuze literally credits him for helping build out what desire machines are. So it's kind of hard not to put those together. But the intensities of the world, think of it as the vibrations and impulses of life. And not just life, but just everything, just impulses, like waves that move through all the stuff. Early on, he talks about how Nietzsche saw waves of water and like at the ocean. He saw them crashing and he saw them building. And he goes, waves, you and I are of akin. And he doesn't mean the water. The weird thing of waves is that they're not the water. The waves are the energy that is in the water that's wholly dependent on all the other energy around it. The wave in front of it, the wave behind, the wave a million miles away affects it minorly. All these waves are going. This isn't a chaos. This isn't that. This is just the way things exist, the way stuff exists as this intensities. Now, the intensities start slamming into each other as they do, and noise patterns begin to emerge. Various patterns based on a whole bunch of different things. We happen to exist towards one end of this, but the process basically goes intensities interfere and deal with each other, and through them, various degrees of phantasm emerge. Phantasm is more, I don't want to say a particular configuration, but it is the obsessional image that is generated, not visual image, but like the snapshot or the moment coalesces of all of these intensities into the phantasm. The phantasm is the way that those coalescing moments happen and all those energies come together. And it's an obsessional image. It's a thing that, due to a whole bunch of stuff, sort of emerges from this. But we can't communicate phantasms. I can't speak to you of the phantasms within me. So what I do is, intensities turn to phantasms, which are internal. I take the phantasm and I speak it. I give it voice. And I do this through language, the code of everyday signs, as he calls it. If you've been around children who are learning to speak, very much this. Hey, are you hungry? Are you sad? Are you fussy? Are you poopy? Are you vomity? Are you burpy? These kinds of language and these codes that get put on a child, they learn the phantasm they're experiencing, which is more complex than any of these words, but they learn the word that represents it best. And I put that a big fucking question mark. This is simulacra. This is the image you're putting into the world to communicate this. And we mistake it for the intensities instead of what it is, which is a layer of translation on top of the image. This layering, this process of meaning and how it sort of generates itself in Klossowski, we're at the point now where we're talking about the intensities do not have intention, even though we link those words a lot. They're sort of just bouncing around. The waves of the world are doing what they're doing. Waves don't crash onto the beach because God wants them to. They crash on the beach because of, or they don't crash on the beach because of the tides. They don't crash on the beach because of where the moon is at. They don't crash on the beach. This is a thing that just happens. But the moment we start talking about why a thing's happening, the moment we understand it as a thing in a large, we're telling and adding intention to all of these waves. We're creating the obsessional image. And then from there, we're moving on to talking about it. This is the simulacra. Now, the ability for us to talk about it, the reason the simulacra is powerful is because it doesn't have to be perfect. In fact, the more perfect it is, the odder and uncanny it becomes. When you communicate to me, if you were to just ramble all of the words that apply to all of the things you're feeling and all of the obsessional images going through you, I would think you're a crazy person. We do that. We lock those people up. Instead, you tend to need to be, I would argue, everyone has to be poetic about how they talk about it. You can be simple. Yeah, I'm just hangry. There you go. It explains a lot in a small amount, but we can do more. We can actually do poetry. We can actually speak to things that maybe aren't exactly that. We can actually utilize words to generate and reflect back towards all of this. This is one of the really strange ways of how communication works and how art works and how poetry works, but this is the process we're talking about. So when we talk about simulacra, that's the end of that. I think that's like really fast version of it. Deleuze has a fantastic paper at the end of, I want to say it's the Columbia printing of Logic of Sense. Got added a handful of pieces that he really liked going with it. One of them is on Klossowski's simulacrum, which he uses throughout Logic of Sense, which comes from Plato's simulacrum, by the way. So words do not fully represent the thing being described in reality. That's what makes language a simulacrum. Language is not a simulacrum. The words are simulacrum. I mean, language as a word is a simulacrum. Your conception of it is too, but how you see it and the image behind it is not. All things are immediately generated and consumed. This is not words are floating out there. Nope. Right now, this is a ever-growing immediacy as you understand things and as you're experiencing. Best bet would be to go back and watch where I'm reading chapter 2 and 3. I go through it a lot. But for now, let's read some Nietzsche. The metamorphosis of humanity requires thousands of years for the formation of a type, then generations. Finally, an individual during its life passes through several individuals. Why could we not succeed in doing with humanity what the Chinese have learned to do with a tree, making it bear roses on one side and pears on the other? These natural processes of anthropoculture, for example, which until now have been practiced with extreme slowness and clumsiness, could be taken in hand by humanity itself, and the old acts of cowardice of the races, the racial struggles, could then be reduced to brief periods of time, at least in an experimental fashion. Entire continents henceforth consecrated to this conscious experimentation. Okay. There is like so much to go on here. Let's talk about a couple things that this segment is doing. First is, and it kind of opens, it's a compression of timescales. The metamorphosis of humanity requires thousands of years for the formation of a type, then generations. Finally, an individual during its life passes through several individuals. This is a wild, it's again, I love reading Nietzsche because it makes my brain dance. It feels like my brain's dancing as I read it. It's like, holy fuck, there's so much happening here. But he's sort of compressing all of these things into even the moment and then the life of a person. There's the type formation, the type of humanity requires thousands upon thousands of years. And then generations do the next step, and then the individual. The metamorphosis is happening here through smaller and smaller orders of magnitude. And then he ends with the idea that individuals pass as many individuals, right? The eternal return. It's the eternal return. Mandy says the word isn't floating. That would imply intention to float. It only describes the verb floating. The word is not actually floating. You're playing purely in the abstract space of that point. The discrepancy is not the phantasm. You're talking and speaking and writing, but you are expressing. All of that is simulacrum. It's referring back for you to phantasms. You're not referring to someone else's simulacrum. One of the great errors we make when it comes to how we talk, and I went over this in my last video, We have this understanding that there's an exchangist version of this. As Brooks is talking, my impulses are generating ideas, are generating words come out. You then take in words and then you decode them into meaning and then that. But that's not how it works. That would be like a weird one-to-one exchangist notion. And we just don't, like, there's nothing to back that up. Even modern scientific literature is much more that actually you have an immediate effective, apprehensive, internal response. There's no digesting intellectually of what a person's saying, not in any meaningful sense. So what's happening instead is I speak, and that is directly connecting then with your intensities. Your intensities build off of that, create your own obsessional image, which then you're also doing the same thing with and creating simulacra off of in an ever changing moment of responses. Now, we understand these things back and forth because of how we look back in time. We understand looking back in time, we can go, oh, you're saying this, so I said this, so you said that. But that's like flattening the shit out of everything in every moment, because there's no person on earth who just thinks. Thinks is an odd term in and of itself. Thoughts are themselves something that are evoked. You don't have just thoughts. They're evoked from somewhere. They're evoked from things outside. So there's a lot of ways that we speak and ways that we talk that fuck with us across all of it, across all of this. And the way that we talk very often builds in that intensive and phantasmic category. This fabulation, this intentionality that is sort of laying back, falling back, folding back all of these things into it. He uses the image in here, and it's in the second little part here. The way the Chinese have learned to do with a tree, making it bear roses on one side and pears on the other. This is grafting. So this is a really specific language he's using. And he says the Chinese, because they're the ones at the time that were famous for doing this and kind of cultivated this idea. I use the word cultivated. I don't know why. That's doubling up. You can graft and create chimeras of plants, trees, and bonsais. You can see experts do this with, and it's incredible. You're able to find a way to make a tree like carry multiple other organisms as part of itself, right? It's making it bear roses on one side and pears on the other. He's not saying like they figured out how to like talk to a tree to make it do one thing or the other. That's not the thing. What they did is they grafted onto a pear tree. They grafted on early on. They cut off part of it, grafted on a fucking rose tree or a flower, some other flowering tree on the other side. These things are not incompatible. They're made to carry incompatible natures as a chimera. These aren't thoroughbreds. This image he's evoking here is not one of the purification of things. It's the opposite. It's why could we not succeed in doing with humanity what the Chinese learned to do with the tree? How can we not force the coexistence of that which is fundamentally incompatible? We can do it with plants. People are not that much more interesting as a thing. They're just not. Like, this is what he's sort of getting at. The anthropoculturation that he sort of gets into, which I really love. Anthropoculture. He's speaking in terms of plants, horticultural. This is not like human culture. He's using it in a very like literal way. Like this is horticulture is the caring of plants and all of that. How about anthropoculture in the same way? How about anthropoculture? Right? How about viticulture? This is the concept of culture now being almost attacked by these guys, which I appreciate the shit out of. But he's pulling it up here. Nietzsche hated the idea of culture. And I'll make a recommendation around that in a moment. But having a body horror grafting moment, I think about it as your soul instead. Like think about it as what you are and how you consider yourself. The idea of the way we self-actualize or self-legitimize by knowing our culture. This is my culture. Thank you very much. That bourgeois self-legitimization is agricultural at root. Culture is fundamentally that phrasing. This is absolutely that. It's absolutely that. The natural processes of anthropoculture, again, like horticulture, like viticulture, like the way humans have been grown, for example, which until now have been practiced with extreme slowness and clumsiness, could be taken in hand by humanity itself. The old acts of cowardice of the races, racial struggles, could then be reduced to brief periods of time. At least in experimental fashion, entire continents henceforth consecrated to this conscious experimentation. Racial conflicts. This is why, like, when people talk about Nietzsche being a Nazi, it's lines like this. They're like, a Nazi would not write this. Like just so a Nazi would not write this. They would write, no, we must keep the germs of the seeds in various, we have to separate everything. We do not cross-contaminate. He's literally saying cross-contaminate the shit out of us. Like, it's literally the opposite of Nazi. It's so opposite of Nazi. God damn it. The old acts of the cowardice of the races, the racial struggles, right? I'm posting a grainy image of the t-shirt I have on. You have a big ear shirt. Hey, this was sent to me by Jack from the server. I didn't get to go, sadly. But Jack in the server sends me from wherever he goes. Nietzsche was a radical cosmopolitan who hated anti-Semites and German nationalism. You still have to make the argument for a lot of people that he's not a fucking Nazi, though. Because idiots like Philosophy Tube do entire fucking video series on how he's clearly a Nazi. Because they're stupid. It's still like eugenics, kind of. Well, it's using the language of it, but it's like eugenics in opposition to eugenics as we know it, right? Like, okay, I'm going to make my point with this. The old acts of cowardice of the races, the racial struggles, could be reduced to brief periods of time. He's saying racial conflict is what happens when anthropoculture, which is, I need a better word for that. I'm actually might ask AI to give me a better word for that because it's such a fucking good phrase. The anthropoculturalization, right? Normally it's pretty slow. It's very slow. Conscious experimentation could compress and thereby end it, is what he's saying. This is not a call for racial struggle. This is not a call for Mein Kampf, right? This is the opposite of that. It is an alternative to it. Now, again, it's not fully defensible what he's stating fully here. Again, time and all, but again, and Klossowski is going to be making basically the same sort of mea culpa in a moment that I'm doing here, so I'm kind of preceding that because he's got a lot of shit where he starts talking about breeds and castes of people and nation and all of that. Totally, absolutely, totally get that. However, the idea of entire continents consecrated to this conscious experimentation, the being aware of what we're doing here, how we're playing with all of this, is huge. It's huge. This thing is what Klossowski is going to be spending time on. He's literally saying race mixing is a good. Correct. Well, so probably my favorite book on this is Francois Julien, very, very small book. Like, it's pamphlet level. There is no such thing as cultural identity. That's the title of the book. And that's the reading I take for this when we talk about this, because Francois Julien's point is more or less that culture isn't a monolithic blob of a thing. Instead, culture's actually a varied, massive collection of elements that themselves are all buried, are borrowed and borrowable, that you can mix and match. Like, the whole point of culture is that you can grab from here and take from here and leave something else behind. And so, because, for example, Germans right now, I could say, hey, German culture is about killing Jews. And I wouldn't be wrong, because if it's one giant thing through the last 100 years, that's kind of a big through line, I would say. I would argue it's kind of a big through line they've got. But that's not really how it works. If you haven't been to Germany recently or talked to a lot of Germans, not really the big thing for them. In fact, they've overcorrected almost and are like super Zionisty. At least the leadership is. There's a weird shift in all of it because culture isn't a thing. Culture is all of these resources that are to be borrowed, that are to be exploited by ourselves, by other people. Brooke's going to get clipped. It's happened before. But that idea of the culturalization is really interesting. And Francois Julien's book, which, one sec, I'll pop it up in chat. I just can't recommend it enough. It's such a good read. I dig it. No such thing as cultural identity. And let me see. I've got a 2 seconds. I just want to see if I can find that section I'm thinking of on the top of my head. All right. From the conceptual distinction between a divide and difference, we should begin to perceive why there can be no such thing as cultural identity, and in the first place, why viewing the diversity of cultures from the perspective of difference leads inexorably to an impasse both up and downstream from difference, if we find identity at either end. Upstream from whatever cultural differences we set forth, logic will compel us to presume a preliminary identity, a common, unitary, primordial genre from which the diversity of cultures could unfold. What is this common genre from which our various cultures should spring as so many specific differences? Shall we call it man or human nature? We'll be hard-pressed to ascribe credible content to either of these. But what else could we project to lie upstream from cultural differences, such that they may unfold from it like a fan? We might say common ground, as others have done, but this is just another naive name for the great X that, once we adopt the logic of difference, we cannot do without. Taking this step is conditional, as it were, on a sacrifice before the myth of monism and the originary one. For it is readily apparent that culture, at whatever scale we consider it, is by nature plural and singular at the very same time. To say in reverse, we must rid ourselves of the convenient representation, itself mythological, according to which there was at the start a cultural unity identity that only later diversified by malediction in the Tower of Babel, or at least through complication by proliferation. Hence the diversity of our languages, which is in no way a posterior phenomenon. I would say instead that culture, by its nature, deploys in the tension, in the divide between the plural and the unitary, that it is caught in a double contrary movement of hetero and homogenization, that it is compelled both to fuse with and break away from, to disidentify and re-identify itself, to conform and to resist. In short, there can be no dominant culture unless a dissident culture forms in tandem. For where does culture come from, if not precisely from the tension of the diverse that the divide produces, that the divide spurs into work and thus also into continual mutation? It's a very good book. 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 Just so you know, it's a very good book. It's a very good book. All right. Now we get to Klossowski's analysis of what we just read. And there's going to be a lot of, there's a lot here. But we'll just start at the top. Nietzsche denounces the absolute discordance between the development of science as a creator of methods or of means and the non-development of the norms of the moral conscience as the end of humanity. The absolute discordance between the development of science as creator of methods. To say maybe another way, we get better and better at how to do things, but we do not get better at deciding why for we do things. Means always improve. Ends are at a standstill. This is the proper Luddite way to view technology, by the way. This is the proper Luddite way to view technology. All technology can do extraordinary things. At no point that I'm aware of in the last 150 years have we changed what we have technology for. Like, AI and the loom basically are driven by the same, why? Like, that's... Moral norms are stalled. Right? Because moral norms are stalled, they're inhibiting fundamentally the creative force of science and scientific methods, the creator of methods or means. It diverts them from anything that would destabilize this particular specific fixity of the human experience. This is not, oh, technology outpaces wisdom. I'm Adorno. I'm cool. No. I like some of Adorno's writing. I shouldn't be so rude about it. But this is not that thing. This is not hauntology as a thing. This is not, why is technology is just overriding our past. Oh, fuck. I hate all that. No, it's like, hey, technology is actually, it's great. The problem is not that method is outrunning morality. It's that morality has successfully leashed method. Science could have destabilized humanity. Has never been stopped by anything except the norms that it does not touch. He's lamenting that technology isn't dangerous enough. Ooh, I have a new thinker. Thank you very much. I have no idea who Jacques Ellul is. Wait, no, I do. Yep, I know who this is. I know a book. Technological Society. Did not recognize his name because it's been a very long time. I need to do that again. That's good stuff. This is almost reverse. This is very much reversing Heidegger. This is crazy opposite Heidegger. It is very much reversing Heidegger. This is this is a huge thing. The claim is that science should be more dangerous and more complicated and fuck things up more. And that science is just a big old coward. Right? We went through this a little bit earlier as well, where we talked about how Klossowski talked about how knowledge makes greater use of the means of things. Right? As that happens, as it makes greater use, as knowledge exists and makes greater use of the means, it becomes less concerned with ends. And every attained end becomes a kind of a pretext for just generating new means. It's a self-replicating way that sort of knowledge and technology work, right? That's the idea of how science operated early, and this is very much the same thing. This is an institutional complaint of this almost specifically. I love it. Bigger paragraph. Let's give it a read. The non-development of moral norms inhibits the creative force of scientific methods and diverts them from any initiative capable of destabilizing the specific fixity of humanity. The notion of scientific reality has always been reinterpreted merely in terms of the moral notion of the reality of self and others. The notion of the scientific real thus winds up corroborating the moral reality of the integrity of the person, more generally, the specific fixity of the human species. Science rests on this specific fixity and integrity since the very fact of knowing, or even being able to know, depends on this integrity. How could something whose primordial dignity consists in knowledge ever place itself in question through its own knowledge? That last line's a fucking humdinger. Last line's a fucking humdinger, by the way. God damn, what a fucking line. Now to read. The non-development of moral norms, I kind of went over that actually accidentally. It's the same point as he was making previous. The notion of did I pick I picked white as the highlighting color. Did you know that doesn't highlight? The notion, why are you still doing this? What the fuck? The notion of scientific reality has always been reinterpreted merely in terms of the moral notion of the reality of self and others. The notion of the scientific real thus winds up corroborating the moral reality of the integrity of the person, more generally, the specific fixity of the human species. Okay. The notion of scientific reality has always been reinterpreted merely in terms of its moral notion of the reality of self and others. It's such a good phrasing. And again, just more or less is saying that same thing we were just talking about. The notion of the scientific real, this is the conclusion, thus winds up corroborating the moral reality of the integrity of the person, and more generally, the specific fixity of the human species. Okay. So we have scientific reality that isn't thought except through the moral notion of reality of self and others. Therefore, the scientific real only confirms that persons are whole, unified, and continuous. Beyond persons, the species is fixed. Integrity is an interesting phrase that he's using here. The moral reality of the integrity. Oh, come on. Integrity of the person. There's a theological side to integrity. The integration, the wholeness, the intactness, the oneness. The integrity of a person is like that. We have this today. I have these conversations a lot with people who they tend to understand their own subjectivity or one's subjectivity as they have an ego. I have a soul. I am a thing. I exist as a whole person. They assume when I say whatever I say that it's the opposite of that I'm obliterating that there's no such thing as them or anything else, which is funny because I say that I'm saying that. So the wholeness and integrity of the person is incredibly important and is more or less a scientific remainder, a leftover outside of the scientific epistemology that exists. Right? Remember that line that I really loved we ended with a little bit ago before we jumped into it? The day human beings learn how to behave as phenomena devoid of intention, for every intention at the level of the human being always implies its own conservation, its continued existence. On that day, a new creature would declare the integrity of existence. integrity of existence. It's redeeming that vocabulary, but playing with experimental as well. These are all terms he's playing with across this whole thing, and that phrasing I just adore as a thing. Integrity. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And then he ends, how could something whose primordial dignity consists in knowledge ever place itself in question through its own knowledge? It's such a fucking great phrase. Tight, simple, basic, paradoxical version of how we talk about things and how science claims to work, right? It's knowledge. Its claim to worth rests on knowing. But you can't use knowing to invalidate knowing or the conditions of knowing. Because if you use knowing to invalidate knowing, then you've invalidated the very form of the thing that you've used to invalidate the thing. You can't dissolve the ground that you're standing on by using the ground. A being that knows things cannot know its way out of being a being that knows things. Knowing requires integrity, right? It requires that. It requires, like science requires a stable knower or a stable measurement or a stable observer, right? One that persists through time, one that's identical to itself, one that is distinct from the thing it knows. You don't ever see scientists going, well, I'm going to go study Brooks right now. That's not what they study everything but themselves. It's like, so they defend their own possibility because the work they do is fundamentally formulated on defending their own possibility. It's built into knowledge and science itself. It is a rigged game. It's set up. Science rests on faith. Scientists don't want to say that. There is no such thing as science that doesn't have any presuppositions. Fundamentally, science is about specific presuppositions, outlining them and having them become objective measurements and views of things and ways that we do stuff. But it is not established by truth. It is not a fixity in and of itself. Not how it works. And then we get into I love the line. This is the kind of quarrel Nietzsche inspired in himself when, haunted by his phantasm of an anthropoculture, he imputed to science the consolidation, rather than the destruction, of the gregarious principle of reality, from whence is derived a double censure, which Nietzsche's thought deliberately transgresses. I fucking just love that. That's just great. My dad, a nephrologist, loves to call psychology bullshit on those grounds. Does he know that nephrology is also bullshit on the same grounds? That's the fun part. That's the fun part. It's all bullshit on the same grounds. No, it's effective. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm not anti-science. I'm not like an anti-vaccine nutcase. None of that shit. I believe in all that stuff, but there's context to it and what it means and how it works and what science is and how it fundamentally operates is kind of built on all of this. Okay. The phrasing in the next paragraph comes off of this last one, right? From whence it is derived a double censure, which Nietzsche's thought deliberately transgresses. And it's odd formatting here. It reads better again, but it's fine. He's just in the scientism paragraph. Oh, no, of course he is. And good for him. We need nephrologists. I'm down with it. Again, it's not a condemnation. That's just, I always love when I hear, because psychology is just such bullshit. Yeah, well, my thing was because of experiments the Nazis did. Like, oh, okay. Let's talk about the double censure. And there's a couple transgressions that we're going to be talking about here. Prohibition, double censure, double prohibition, a double interdiction. It's very specific as a thing. The things that Nietzsche's thought is transgressing. Okay, so let's go with this first little bit here. By authorizing itself, goddamn, I keep hitting the wrong thing. By authorizing itself to remove every experimental limit to the point of putting in question institutions and their code of designation, their suppression, along with the concepts of conscious and unconscious, principle of prophylactic psychiatry, blah, 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 blah. I'll talk about that in a second. It's him talking about the first bit. The thing Nietzsche's deliberately transgressing. By authorizing itself to remove every experimental limit to the point of putting in question institutions and their code of designation. Removing every experimental limit means eliminating any ethical boundaries or edges to anything on what may be tried on anyone in any capacity. All of it. Human experimentation, basically. Things that ethically may make me a little squishy. And make Klossowski squishy, and also make Nietzsche squishy, to be perfectly frank. A little, I'm not sure. To the point of putting in question institutions and their codes of designation. There are institutions in science that name apparatuses and assign status of, for example, sane and insane, normal, pathological, right? Institutions don't really regulate. Institutions, groupings of things in any official capacity, designate. Designation is what makes any particular case intelligible to the institution. If you're not designated, you are not intelligible to the institution. Do you understand that? Very specific. Then we get into the second bit here, which I'm going to do a different color with here. The suppression, along with the concepts of conscious and unconscious of the principle of prophylactic psychiatry. This is things to get rid of. The suppression of and the concepts of conscious and unconscious. This is not liberating the unconscious. By the way, this is also Deleuze's argument for all of you fun people who don't understand that book. This is not that conscious and unconscious need to be properly matched, or that the unconscious needs to be sort of allowed or unshackled. It's that those designations are produced by the fucking institution. The pair falls together or grows together. It's very important. This is not consciousness, conscious versus unconscious, the designations of that. And with it, the principle of prophylactic psychiatry, preventative mental care. The idea that you, like a fucking future seer, have the ability to advance mental conditions to now so you can treat them now to prevent them later. There's nothing to prevent if you do this. It's the elimination of that. Right? Stops you from getting your brain pregnant. Close enough. And then he ends with, since the experimental initiative will now be the prerogative of singular cases whose pathos will constitute the sole criterion of behavior. This is a lot, actually. This is a lot. I think this is a rallying cry of the anti-psychiatry movement. It's one I agree with. And this is, by the way, something I would then put across the board. This is prison abolition, by the way. Like this, there's a lot that this implies as you go. The singular case is you. Whoever's hearing this, you are the singular case. You are not an instance of a human being. That's not what we should consider you as. You are not a white person, a black person. You are not an American. You're not any of, you are a singular case. You yourself are a singular case. That's it. It should begin with you. Everything should begin with you as an individual singular case. Okay? That's like the first thing. Pathos, the pathos of the singular cases will constitute the sole criterion of behavior. Pathos is the undergoing of suffering. That's what pathos is as a thing. The undergoing of the suffering of experience. It's a valetudinary state we went through. So saying that the singular case's pathos is the sole criterion of behavior means that nothing outside that can judge it. The same way that knowledge can't judge itself, right? Like knowledge can't destroy itself or work itself. The herd doesn't have the ability to go outside of itself either. You as the individual, the sole criterion is the thing. This is, we talked at one point earlier, and it's going to be like selection and structure we're going to be talking about a lot in the next handful of paragraphs and really the next few chapters. But this is externalization criteria arriving in a very blunt and open form. If pathos is the sole criterion, if the experience of suffering, the unique experience of suffering that you have is the sole criterion, then no singular case has the ability to be critiqued or criticized by another. And that includes Klossowski, by the way. That includes Klossowski and Nietzsche. Okay? The herd's pathos is also a pathos. Gregariousness would then be its own criterion. Like you can't exclude the thing it exists to exclude. Everything's still in there. So the herd is also the herd. It's nothing outside of that thing can do that. Like that's the point. Criterion in this sense are unexchangeable and unstable. They can't function really as criterion in the way that we talk about things publicly, the way that we talk about things here, where we comment on people, right? And he's going to be talking about this as he gets going. This is Foucault's the way he critiques how psychiatric power grows, and the prophylaxis. Like that phrase is directly from Foucault. And his work on Method of Madness, all that shit, right? This is the thing, the abnormal individual getting labeled and categorized and set up. It's a norm that we exist in now. Biological norms can be done and carried at the state level, like racial things. We talk about Nazis a bunch here. It's a great example of that. State racism as a thing. Talk about what Israel's doing, where this normalization of the biological and the power to kill actually intersect. And that's like the point here. The norm is polemical. It's not descriptive. It's prescriptive as people sort of exist and as they go about their days. So that's the first major transgression. We're going to do the second one and then we'll be done. Because this is where he starts getting, and there's so much. God. We're just going to do the next paragraph. By authorizing itself to remove every experimental limit to the point, well, that's the one we just read, even if this means incurring the wrath of every subsequent respectable philosophy, having to answer for the acts of racial cowardice, as he himself puts it, that might be undertaken by the worst kind of gregarious cretinism, which would lack this phantasm of anthropoculture he was advocating, and for this reason, himself becoming an experimental object of science, namely, an object of psychiatric investigations, both contemporary and subsequent, and hence, under the pretext of enriching their repertory, furnishing numerous arguments in favor of the surveillance of particular cases, thus also perpetuating the subservience of his own thought to the positive concept of the conscious and to the negative concept of the unconscious. Fuck. His transgression and statements here. This is Nietzsche is going to be blamed for acts of racial cowardice. And it's a defense of Nietzsche here, and it's not particularly strong, but it's not intended to be super, super strong. He's going to piss a lot of people off, is what he's saying, is what Klossowski's saying here. Nietzsche's going to get blamed. But what he's being blamed for, those acts of racial cowardice that are undertaken by the worst, the Nazis. He's talking about Nazis. Like this is him talking about the polemic of how the Nazis basically utilized Nietzsche. But the thing is, we have herd stupidity, which is the gregarious cretinism. The herd lacks the phantasm of anthropoculture that he's advocating for because the herd can't deal with that. And he himself is an experimental object of science. The atrocities are not the realization of Nietzsche's project. They are its opposite because the herd is undertaking it from its position. Bataille also, by the way, in his book on Nietzsche, you can read Nietzsche and the Fascists, which was written in the 30s. So you can imagine it's a little close to home for Bataille, right? Visions of Excess, I think, is the one that has it also now. I have issues with this defense. And I think my critique of it might help explain what Klossowski, because I think what he's trying to do here is it's a little rehabilitation, but he's trying to make a larger point around the structuration that is inside of these circles and the critique and how these things came about. The phantom, as he's talked about, the phantasm, is incommunicable. So the singular case's pathos is the sole criterion, right? We just went through that. We just talked through that. So there's no way in principle in any capacity to distinguish from outside of that, the selection that is animated by the phantasm or one animated by the gregarious cretin, the stupidity of the herd, right? So Klossowski's kind of spent a chapter arguing that you can't verify, exchange, or externalize the phantasm, but then is kind of doing it here. And I'm not going to rehabilitate Klossowski here because I think this is a very specific way to come back to the point, like that he's trying to make. Nietzsche himself is an object of science. That's what this is what he's ending with at the top of the page here. It's an experimental object of science, an object of psychiatric investigations, contemporary subsequents, and hence, under the pretext of enriching their repertory, furnishing numerous arguments in favor, he's making an argument here that I don't agree with at all, but I think the point he's getting at. Nietzsche has become a victim of the very things he was critiquing. His critique in particular is how objects of science are utilized and are built and furnished and placed always in favor of surveillance of particular cases. It is the capture from within structure that has been turned on Nietzsche itself. Nietzsche has set out to break this reality principle from inside science. So science absorbed him as a case, his collapse has become the datum. His arguments fit the herd as needed. The data strengthened this prophylactic psychiatry and actually went so far as to really implement it on a herd scale. Right? The transgression Nietzsche committed produced a net increase in the power it is transgressing. This is the vicious circle operating. We're in a very particular section. I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit. Selective doctrine. We're talking about the vicious circle as selective doctrine this time around. What is selective doctrine? Well, this is it in action. This is not operating as what Nietzsche taught, because that's not, we don't care. It doesn't matter. The vicious circle is the thing that happened to him. It's the thing that happened to him here. The selection of him, the way it was selected, the way that these things went. What don't I agree with? It's very minor and specific. I don't like how he's saying, I don't like the softening of Nietzsche's. Nietzsche wrote what Nietzsche wrote. And yes, Nazis have used it. They're using it not because of stupidity of the herd, the cowardice of things, but because what Nietzsche wrote could be used that way. It fit the machinery. It feels to me, as I read this, and this is one of my, again, I try to read Klossowski as Klossowski writes, and I hope I'm not adding too very much for me here, but we've spent a great deal of time talking through how to understand Nietzsche, how to consider this, how to think through how these things are built and how all of this, builds into X, Y, and Z. And here we have like this conditional mood change that Nietzsche went through, the language he's using, which is yikesy, no matter how you read it. But again, not intended that way. I'm with Klossowski. Like this intention, fine. It's clear what Nietzsche's going for, what he's after. The thing he's aiming at is trying to explain this eternal return and trying to explain this obsessional imagery that he's got. I agree with all that. The language at the bottom, these things are undertaken by the worst kind of gregarious cretinism, which would lack the phantasm of the anthropoculture he was advocating, and for this reason, himself becoming an experimental object of science, namely an object of investigations. The wording for me doesn't do all the work it needs to in order to fully rehabilitate Nietzsche in the defense he's trying to do. Because it doesn't work for me structurally. If the phantasm is incommunicable, then the singular case, as we went through, right? Their pathos is the sole criterion, and there's no way to distinguish from outside the selection of that. But Klossowski's kind of doing that for us. He's kind of starting to do that for us here. I've absorbed yours in secondary literature interpretation, and you just don't get yikes with some passages. Yeah, I think, and this is where full rehabilitation of Nietzsche, I'm not super interested in, because I think him as a person, I don't really give a shit. But he was a product of his time. To say otherwise, like the way that he speaks of the racial classes, or even the way he speaks of Germans as a racial group, that he despises anti-Semites as though they're a racial group. There's a weird language he's using that is very much of the time. And again, I don't give a fuck about rehabilitating Nietzsche. He wasn't a Nazi. I think that's totalizing him is stupid as well. But what's happening here in the text is kind of a little bit of edging on that for me. It's a little bit of edging on that. That's how I read it. Right? if Nietzsche's an object of science, right, and this setup as we've gone, there's a move Klossowski is making to get there, and the exculpation, the thing he's pulling out, the setting up, is the thing that the theory itself fundamentally forbids. I would just say don't do it. I would just say don't do this. There's no need, unless you're going to continue to make a point. He sort of does, and I think it lands okay for me. But this is, as I said, the capture from within structure has turned on Nietzsche. The transgression, the note I have, the transgression produced a net increase in the power it was transgressing. That is the thing I think is worth taking from this, because that's what Klossowski is going to be running with. Nietzsche absolutely transgressed he upset so many philosophers and scientists. He still does. He pisses people off regularly. People still read him. They're upset by things he said. And not in the, sort of Nazi way, but in the like, what do you mean science doesn't have an understanding of anything? That kind of shit. But that thing he's within is still capturing him. Like, he doesn't exist. He's not like a god outside of any of these things. Right? Yes, like Yikesy language, German. Is it Klaus in Family Guy? Said there's a old German saying, do not blame the fish. We have many other sayings, but mostly they involve genocide. But it's the thing we're doing, and it's really worthwhile, is considering like how he was implied, how he was brought in, and what was able to happen to capture him in this way. That's the language I would think is really worthwhile. Right? Because the question is, are we doing a diagnosis, or is this fate? Is Nietzsche's transgression the thing that produced its own capture? Which is where we're going to be going. Again, I think the language here is soft, and it just rubs me the wrong way. That's why I get stuck on it mentally. It's just soft language. And it's soft in French. This is not a translation thing. It's kind of overly soft on some of the shit Nietzsche was saying that's even though I'm fairly confident because of Nietzsche's writings that he wasn't any of these things. Right? Like, because there's a lot of eugenics in what we just said. There's a lot of eugenics in Nietzsche too. That, again, products of time, speaking of things differently, understandings of things that I think are worth having for his time. But if the capture was produced by this, then it's not really a doctrine of the vicious circle. It's more structured. It's more of a structure itself. The selective doctrine of the chapter title, that is this whole thing, the selective doctrine is the title of the chapter, has kind of already been refuted at this point, if that's the case. Right? And as we read in this sort of bit here, and we're going to be going into it next week a little deeper, you got to confront the eugenicist takes pretty spot on. And Klossowski does to a point here. It's one of the things, again, I think it's just a weird lead in. I'm not just a super big fan of. But that is for sure that we're going to do one more paragraph. Given the depreciation of conscious categories, did Nietzsche ever assert that it was necessary to confide the safeguarding of the unconscious to pathological cases? Did he not himself recommend in his notes that the most severe restrictions be imposed on the degenerate, namely, that they be forbidden to reproduce themselves? Did he not go so far as to feign an interest in public health by envisioning a rather tedious set of prenuptial examinations under the pretext of preventing a calamitous propagation? His own suspicion that he was the son of a degenerate family, or the victim of some accident of pleasure, here again comes to light. These are the more or less obscure pretexts that wound up nourishing his Malthusian rage, whose persistent motif remained Nietzsche's phobia towards all gregarious phenomena. Now we get back to the good stuff. Klossowski, again, a little weak defense, because he's kind of diving into it. He doesn't want to be super specific and get into like the worst of it, but it's saying, hey, the degenerates, you think the degenerates shouldn't be allowed to reproduce? That's fucking thing. Before people get married, they should have to take lots of tests of things, and we should guide, which, by the way, conservatives believed until we didn't have enough workers. Now they want a lot more of people. They want everyone to reproduce all the time. They used to have a blood test, for God's sake, like a right-wing wild thing as a thing. But the pathos as sole criterion, which is what he's kind of playing with here. Like that's what Klossowski is sort of pulling out specifically. But he's also reading the eugenics here as symptomatic because it's the thing the doctrine is licensing. And also the move that then dissolves the doctrine's authority. This circularity is to be tracked for Klossowski. Klossowski doesn't want us to like fully rehabilitate Nietzsche in this sense of like, oh no, he was always great. No. Take these things and understand how they fed back into what he was doing. But the counter inversion, how these things worked, how the selection worked with it as a thing. Like, right? How do we get back to that counter inversion and then have the space of the impulses, the intensities of things pushing? We're going to be talking through all this in the next week, which is going to be a lot. So good. It gets so good really quick here. But again, the way I would, the reason I'm in the dilemma live is because we are. Just to read, the dilemma, however, was inscribed in Nietzsche's position once it required the invention of simulacra through an interpretive force. Once the pathos of the singular case, even if it is that of the metapsychologist, was called upon to institute what is valuable, what is real, and what is not. And that's where we're going to start next week. That's the lines. I think this is a good book. I love this book. I adore it. And it's, Klossowski's writing is exceptional. And I was hung up because I think I'm very reactive to the general thing of either people are always trying to rehabilitate Nietzsche or they're trying to condemn him. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Like doing that is the problem. And Klossowski has no interest in doing that. So it's good. It's fun. Let me see where I can send my viewers for YouTube. Who do I got right now? Let's see. God, Resi still going? Yeah, I'm not sending anyone to Resi right now because we did that last night and it was horrifying. Is anyone live? What the fuck? Like no one? Oh, you know what? I'm going to send you guys to a DSA Democrat who's trying to run in Kansas. That will be. Oh, I can't rate him. Oh, that's sad. That's sad. I can't rate him. Well, that's a shame. Can't send you guys anywhere. So that means bye, YouTube. I'll see you soon enough. And we should be fairly clear. I can't tell if we're clear.